The officer's knee was on my neck before I even had time to drop the groceries. I heard my bag of oranges split open on the linoleum. They rolled in slow, absurd circles while he screamed something about resisting. I had not resisted. I had said, "Sir, I'm a United States Army Ranger." And that made it worse. But 4 hours before a grocery store in Clarksville, Tennessee, became the most watched 12 minutes of surveillance footage in the country, I was just a tired staff sergeant trying to buy milk and eggs before closing time. My name is Marcus Darrell Washington. I'd been home from my third deployment for exactly 6 weeks when it happened. 6 weeks of bad sleep, phantom alarm clocks at 0400, and the specific kind of silence that only comes after 18 months of living inside noise. My wife, Kezia, had gone back to work. She was a nurse at the local army hospital, double shifts, never a complaint, and most days I moved through our house like a man still getting used to the idea that the walls weren't going to shake. We lived in a 2-bedroom rental off Fort Campbell Boulevard, beige carpet, and one broken ceiling fan we kept meaning to fix. Nothing glamorous. But it was ours, and it was quiet. And after Kandahar, quiet felt like something I hadn't quite earned yet. That Tuesday started easy. Kezia had left me a list on the kitchen counter, held down by her half-empty coffee mug like a paperweight. Eggs, whole milk, pasta, hand soap, and at the bottom, in her handwriting that still curled softly at the ends, something sweet. Your call. I smiled at that. I showered, pulled on civilian clothes, gray joggers, a white t-shirt, my old Ranger Regiment hoodie, the one with the airborne crest half faded from 100 washes, and grabbed my keys. The truck needed an oil change. I noticed and did nothing about it. That's the kind of nothing day it was. Rutherford's was a mid-sized grocery chain, family-owned, 2 locations in Clarksville. The produce was good. The employees knew regulars by name, and the parking lot had a straight, clean line to the entrance. I parked in the far corner out of habit, old infantry instinct, always leave yourself an exit, and stood by the truck for a moment in the October air, which had a bite in it, clean and sharp the way Tennessee gets in fall. I breathed it in. No reason to linger. I went inside. I grabbed a basket, not a cart. Kezia's list was short. I started with the eggs, checked a few cartons the way she'd taught me, edges first, not center, then moved toward the dairy aisle. The store had that low, familiar hum of refrigerator units and overhead fluorescence. A woman with a toddler in her cart passed me near the yogurt section. The kid was gnawing on a pretzel and staring at me with the expressionless fascination that only toddlers and security cameras share. I gave him a nod. He kept staring. Fair enough. I was in the pasta aisle when I first noticed the off-duty store security officer. Heavy-set, close-cropped gray beard. The kind of man who'd worked retail security for 20 years and walked like he owned every square foot of every floor he'd ever stood on. He was at the far end of the aisle, not looking at anything in particular, or so it seemed. I've been trained to read the small physical language of threat the way most people read background noise, and there was something in the way his weight shifted when I turned the corner that filed itself away in a cold, quiet place below my ribs. Not fear. Not yet. Just attention. The kind your body keeps before your brain has caught up. I found the pasta with the blue box, dropped it in the basket, and moved on. Hand soap. Last aisle. I was almost done. I remember thinking about Deshawn's text, about whether I felt like watching the game Thursday, about whether Kezia would be home in time to eat with me, or whether I'd leave a plate in the oven for her. Small thoughts. The thoughts of a man who has no reason to be anywhere but where he is. I didn't hear the cop come in. That's the detail I keep returning to. I didn't hear the door. Officer Dale Pruitt, Badge 1147, 7 years on the Clarksville PD, and 3 prior internal affairs complaints that had been quietly filed and just as quietly shelved. He'd come in off duty, still in full uniform, because he'd stopped for a drink on the way to his second shift. That's what he told his sergeant later. He just stopped in, and then he saw me. I was already in the checkout line when it started. My items were on the belt: eggs, milk, the pasta, the hand soap, and a pack of Reese's cups for Casius something sweet. And I was reading a text from Deshawn, about to type one word back, when the voice came from behind me and to the left. Hey, you, don't move. Flat. Preloaded. The voice of a man who had decided how this conversation was going to go before he ever opened his mouth. I turned slowly, the way you learn to turn when someone behind you is loud and armed. Officer Pruitt stood 6 feet away, hand resting on his belt just above the holster. Not drawing. Not yet. But the hand was a statement. "Can I help you?" I said. My voice came out even. Ranger training doesn't make you fearless. It makes you functional inside the fear. "Step out of line," he said. His eyes had not moved from my face, not my hands, not my basket, not the items sitting on the belt, just my face. The cashier, a young woman named Brianna, 19 years old, I would learn her name later, went very still behind the register. The man in line behind me took one slow step back. I heard the refrigerators humming. Somewhere deeper in the store, a child was crying softly, the kind of tired crying that has no energy left for urgency. I stepped out of line. "Officer, my name is Staff Sergeant Marcus Washington, United States Army, 75th Ranger Regiment. Is there a problem?" Something moved across his face. Not recognition, not even surprise. It was closer to irritation, the specific, tight-jawed irritation of a man whose internal script had just been interrupted. "Someone matching your description has been seen shoplifting from this store," he said, reaching for his radio without taking his eyes off me. My stomach pulled tight. Not from guilt. I knew exactly what was in my basket and what it had cost, and I had the cash to pay for all of it twice over. It was a different kind of tightening. Older. Deeper. The kind that lives in the body of a black man in America like scar tissue, and activates at the sound of exactly those 5 words. Someone matching your description. I've been through a combat deployment in Afghanistan. I've cleared buildings in the dark with men shooting at me from 4 directions. I have a Ranger tab I earned in 61 days of dirt and sleep deprivation, and I have a combat infantryman badge, and I have a faded photograph of my unit taped inside my locker. And in that moment, none of it was a shield. "I haven't taken anything," I said, keeping my voice low and level. "My items are right there on the belt. I'm going to reach into my left pocket for my wallet, slowly, both hands visible. Keep your hands where I can see them." His voice went up a notch. "That's what I'm doing. I'm showing you I'm not a threat." I said don't move. I stopped. Brianna had her hand pressed over her mouth. The man who'd stepped back was filming on his phone, arm raised, casual as a tourist. I noticed the security camera mounted above the service desk, its small red indicator light burning steady and indifferent. I thought, with the strange, cold clarity that arrives in moments when everything else has gone quiet. Good. See this. Record every single second. What happened next is documented on 4 cameras simultaneously. The entrance camera caught Pruitt crossing toward me. The checkout lane overhead camera caught him grab my left arm and spin me into the register counter. The service desk wide angle got everything, the items scattering off the belt, Brianna stumbling back from the register, the man with his phone taking a full step forward to keep me in frame. And Brianna's own lane camera, positioned directly above the belt, caught the moment his forearm crossed my shoulders and drove me chest first into the rubber conveyor. "I am not resisting," I said. My cheek pressed against the belt. I could feel the motor vibrating beneath it, low and constant like a pulse. "I am not resisting." He said nothing. He just pressed harder, and the weight of him was enormous, and the fluorescent lights above me were very bright and very indifferent. And I thought about Kezia reading a text from me tonight saying, "Running late, leave a plate," and I thought about the broken ceiling fan we'd never fixed, and I thought, with the crystalline absurdity of a mind that still needs something small to hold on to. The bag of oranges had fallen off the end of the belt. I could hear them rolling, slow, unhurried, scattered in every direction. I hadn't even paid for them yet. They took me to the back office. Not to a holding room, not to a squad car, to the small beige manager's office behind the deli counter, which smelled like processed meat and old paper, and which had a single fluorescent tube that buzzed faintly at a frequency I felt in my back teeth. Officer Pruitt sat across the small folding table from me, arms crossed, saying nothing. A second officer arrived 7 minutes later, Officer Tanya Briscoe, younger, quieter, with eyes that moved fast and registered things. And she looked at me once, then looked at Pruitt, and something crossed her face that she was too professional to say out loud. "Can I see your ID?" Pruitt said. Not a question. "Already offered it twice," I said. "You told me not to move." "Don't get smart." "I'm not being smart. I'm being accurate." He slid his hand flat on the table between us. "ID, now." I reached slowly into my back left pocket and placed my military ID on the table, followed by my Tennessee driver's license, followed, after a pause in which I held his gaze, by my Ranger tab card, the laminated unit identification that I kept in my wallet not out of vanity, but because 3 deployments had taught me that certain doors open faster when you produce the right key. He looked at the military ID for a long moment. Then he looked at me. "This says E6. Staff Sergeant. Yes. 75th Ranger Regiment." He said it with a flatness that was almost impressive in its deliberateness, as if the words meant nothing, as if they were a grocery item he was scanning. "That's correct." Briscoe had her notepad out. I watched her write something, then stop writing, then write something else. The buzzing light between us kept its indifferent, electric pitch. "Someone called in a shoplifting complaint," Pruitt said. "Blackmail, hoodie, your height." My hoodie has the airborne crest on the left chest, the name Washington stenciled on the back. I've been in this store 17 minutes. I have a receipt. Well, I would have a receipt if I'd been allowed to complete my transaction. Silence. The refrigeration hummed from outside the wall. Brianna was out there somewhere, probably still standing by the register with her hand over her mouth. "Who called it in?" I asked. Pruitt's jaw moved once. "That's not your concern." "A man named Dale Pruitt," my attorney would tell me 11 days later, leaning back in his chair in his downtown Nashville office with the kind of calm that comes from knowing you have everything you need. Made no call log prior to entering Rutherford's. There was no radio dispatch. No complaint was ever filed with store management. The security officer on shift, a man named Garrett, been there 12 years, says he flagged no one. There was no shoplifting report. Dale Pruitt walked into that store, saw you, and made a decision. He paused and let that land, and the cameras caught all of it. But that was 11 days away. In that buzzing back office, I was still sitting with my hands flat on a folding table, working to keep my breathing steady and even. The way you learn to breathe when you're in a place where the wrong movement, the wrong word, the wrong tone of voice can end your life. I had learned that breathing in Kandahar. I had not expected to need it in a Clarksville grocery store at 8:40 on a Tuesday evening. Briscoe stepped slightly outside the door and made a call. I couldn't hear the words, only the tone, measured, efficient, the neutral voice of someone managing a situation they've assessed as complicated. When she came back, she stood near the door rather than at the table, which told me something. "You can go," she said. Pruitt looked at her. "He can go," she repeated, not loud, but not soft either. I stood. I picked up my IDs and put them back into my wallet with the same slow, deliberate movements I'd used to produce them. I walked out of that office, past the deli counter with its smell of old ham, back into the fluorescent ordinary of the store floor, where my oranges had been collected and placed back in a pile near the checkout, and where Brianna was still at register 3 with red-rimmed eyes and a stillness that told me she had not moved since I was taken away. "I'm so sorry," she said very quietly. "Not your fault," I told her, and I meant it. I paid for my items. All of them, including the oranges. I walked to the truck. I sat in the driver's seat for 4 minutes without starting the engine, both hands on the wheel, staring at nothing. Then I called Kezia. She answered on the second ring, mid-shift, and I could hear the hospital behind her, the specific ambient sound of corridors and equipment. "Marcus, what's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," I said. And then I paused, because the word wrong felt suddenly inadequate for what I was trying to describe, the way a teacup feels inadequate for holding a river. "I need to tell you something when you get home." I heard her breath change. "Are you hurt?" "No." "Are you safe?" "I'm in the parking lot of Rutherford's." A silence. Then, "I'll see if someone can cover the last 2 hours." She was home by 10. She sat across from me at the kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a mug she wasn't drinking from, and I told her the whole thing from the moment I parked to the moment Briscoe said I could go. I kept my voice level because I had been keeping my voice level for 7 hours, and I did not know how to stop. Kezia didn't say anything for a long time after I finished. She looked at the table. Then she looked up at me with the particular expression she wears when she has already decided something that you are still catching up to. "We're calling Marcus Sr. in the morning," she said. Marcus Sr. was my father. He was also a retired Army colonel, a 28-year career officer, a man who had survived Vietnam, 2 Pentagon assignments, and 3 Republican administrations, and who now practiced law in Nashville. He was 61 years old, and he was the most dangerous human being I had ever met in a conference room. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on my back in the dark for a long time, listening to Kezia breathe beside me, watching the ceiling fan we'd never fixed not move. I thought about Dale Pruitt's hand resting on the belt above his holster. I thought about the red light of that camera burning steady above the service desk. I thought about Brianna's red-rimmed eyes and her apology that wasn't hers to give. And somewhere around 3 in the morning, the thing that had been sitting hot and formless in my chest began to cool and consolidate into something harder, sharper, and calmer. It was not anger anymore. Anger is loud. What I felt by 4 o'clock was quiet. The kind of quiet I used to feel the night before a mission, where everything unnecessary falls away, and what remains is just the objective and the steps to reach it. I got up, made coffee, sat at the kitchen table with my father's number ready in my phone, and waited for morning. I watched the window go from black to gray to the specific pale amber of a Tennessee October dawn. I drank 2 cups. I made a third for Kezia. I thought about the camera above the service desk, and I was completely, utterly calm. My father was in Nashville by noon. He had already called Rutherford's corporate office. He had already requested, not asked, requested, the full surveillance archive for Tuesday evening, time-stamped and legally preserved. He had already spoken with Captain Yates at the Clarksville PD, whom he knew personally from a city council working group 3 years prior, and he had said in the measured and irresistible tone that had once made a Pentagon general take his glasses off and listen. "Your officer detained a United States Army Staff Sergeant of the 75th Ranger Regiment on the basis of no documented complaint, used physical force, and impeded a legal transaction. Your cameras agree with my son. I'd like to discuss this before a civil rights attorney does." Captain Yates reviewed the footage the same afternoon. 16 hours after that, Dale Pruitt was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. 4 days later, the footage was released. I did not release it. I want to be precise about that. Rutherford's released it, as part of a corporate statement distancing themselves from the incident, and after receiving legal pressure from 3 separate directions simultaneously. 4 cameras, 12 minutes. The footage was clean, complete, and utterly without ambiguity. You could see the moment Pruitt entered the store. You could see his eyes find me. You could see him cross the floor with the specific, loaded purposefulness of a man who has already decided the ending before he's written the beginning. And you could see me, basket in hand, items on the belt, reading a text, doing nothing that warranted a second glance from anyone in the world, except Officer Dale Pruitt, badge 1147. The video had 11 million views by Thursday morning. By Friday, 3 news networks had crews in Clarksville. My father sat beside me at a small press conference in front of the courthouse. I wore my Class A uniform, with every ribbon and every badge, and the Ranger tab clearly visible, because my father suggested it, and he was not wrong. And I read a prepared statement in a voice that I kept perfectly level, not because I wasn't feeling anything, but because I had learned a long time ago that the quieter you speak when you're right, the louder the room gets. I said that I had served 3 deployments with the 75th Ranger Regiment. I said that I had faced enemy fire in 3 countries and never once lost my composure. I said that what happened at Rutherford's on Tuesday evening was not an isolated incident but a pattern, and that I intended to pursue every legal avenue available to ensure it was treated as one. Behind me, 2 rows back, sat Brianna. She had come on her own, dressed in a yellow jacket, and when a reporter asked her afterward what she had seen, she said very simply, "He didn't do anything. He was buying oranges." She said it with the matter-of-fact clarity of someone who has decided that the truth is not complicated, only inconvenient. I found her after and shook her hand, and she looked like she might cry again, and I told her she was braver than she knew. The civil suit was filed 8 weeks later. My father led it, with 2 civil rights attorneys brought in from Atlanta as co-counsel. The complaint cited 42 U.S.C. Section 1983, excessive force, unlawful detention, and racial discrimination in the conduct of a law enforcement officer. The city of Clarksville settled 14 months after filing. The terms were sealed, but the amount was described by my father only as appropriate and then some. Dale Pruitt did not return to active duty. The investigation found the 3 prior internal affairs complaints against him, 2 of which involved black male subjects, and the department could not reassemble them into something that looked like coincidence. He resigned before the disciplinary board concluded. Yes, that's the legal ending. But endings that live in documents are not the only kind. 8 months after the settlement, I was redeployed for a 4th time. My choice, my re-enlistment, my decision made from a place of clarity rather than escape. The night before I flew out, Kessia and I sat in the kitchen after dinner, not talking much, comfortable the way you get comfortable with someone you've chosen again and again. She was drinking tea. I was finishing the last of the coffee. The ceiling fan above us turned slowly. We had finally gotten around to fixing it, and it moved with a steady, quiet ease that it had never had before. "You good?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. She looked at me for a moment with those nurse's eyes that miss nothing. Then she nodded once, satisfied. I looked at the fan turning. Thought about Pruitt's face in that back office. Thought about 11 million people watching a man buy oranges and seeing exactly what it was. Thought about Brianna in a yellow jacket saying he was buying oranges like it was the simplest, most obvious thing in the world. Because it was. I finished my coffee. It wasn't bitter. I rinsed the mug and set it on the counter, and for the first time in a long time, the quiet in the house was mine. Completely, entirely, unmistakably mine.